I'm truly impressed, Nicole. If it were me, there's no way I could juggle three part-time jobs at once. Standing beside the Christmas tree, my older sister Casey said this while holding a champagne flute in her hand. The designer dress she was wearing probably cost more than what I earned in an entire month. You really have incredible grit. It sounded like praise, yet there was an unmistakable undertone of condescension. I forced a smile and replied with a simple, thank you. Next to my sister, my mother nodded approvingly. I'm truly proud of you. The living room was filled with cheerful laughter from family and relatives, but I felt strangely alienated, unable to fully blend into the circle. Early morning shifts at a cafe, the university library, a late night restaurant. For the past 3 years, that cycle had been my entire life. All for one dream to become a nurse. That single goal was what kept me going. Then it happened. My grandfather, who had been sunk deep into the sofa, quietly opened his mouth. Casey, your dress is certainly lovely, but isn't Nicole's effort something of a different kind? The atmosphere in the room shifted ever so slightly. My grandfather turned toward me and continued in a calm yet unmistakably authoritative tone. Nicole, tell me something. Why do you have to work that hard? The question felt like the stillness before a storm. Though puzzled, I answered honestly, for my tuition and living expenses, Grandpa. At that, my grandfather furrowed his brow deeply and shot a sharp, incredulous look at my mother and sister. That doesn't add up. I was told that every year more than enough money has been transferred into your account. In an instant, all sound vanished from the living room. My heart pounded loudly in my chest. An account? Money? What was he talking about? Beside me, my sister's perfectly composed smile froze solid. My grandfather's words dropped like a bomb, plunging the room into silence. All eyes pierced into my frozen mother and sister. It was my mother who broke the silence first. She waved her hands frantically, stumbling over her words as she tried to explain. Father, well, that is, yes, the money does exist, but we thought it might be too soon for Nicole, so we decided to manage it ourselves. Before she could finish, my sister Casey cut in. She regained her composure in an instant, put on a flawless smile, and addressed my grandfather. That's right, Grandpa. Just like Mom said, she's still young and not very good with managing money. So I've been responsibly saving it for my little sister. I was planning to give it to her as a surprise. Right, Nicole? She even winked at me as if asking for my agreement. The flawless excuse, the confidence with which she delivered it, but I had seen it. The fleeting expression of fear that twisted her face just before she spoke. Memories flooded my mind all at once. Luxury hotels across Europe filling her social media, designer handbags multiplying every season, and the day I struggled to pay my tuition and asked my sister for help. I'm sorry, I'm tight this month too, she had said, looking apologetic as she turned me down. Saving it for me? No. The puzzle pieces clicked into a horrifying picture. What had all my suffering over these past 3 years been for, and whose money had funded my sister's glamorous lifestyle? I felt anger rise quietly from deep within me, but I didn't explode. If I caused a scene here, she would simply wriggle her way out with another polished lie. I slowly stood up and locked eyes with my sister, who was still wearing that frozen smile. Then, in as calm a voice as I could manage, I said clearly, Casey, I'm very interested in this surprise you mentioned. Could you tell me more about it in the other room? After those words, no one could object. I quietly closed the door to the adjoining room, shutting out the false bustle of family cheer. Inside were only my mother, my sister Casey, and me. I crossed my arms and faced them. Enough with the excuses. Give me the account details. At my cold tone, my sister continued playing the role of a tragic heroine. Nicole, why won't you trust us? We're thinking of what's best for you. My mother, flustered, chimed in. That's right, Nicole. Calm down. Casey really does care about you. Stop it. For the first time, I let my emotions show. I'm sick of hearing that. If you won't tell me, I'll find out myself. I stormed out of the room, ignored the stunned relatives, and headed straight for my grandfather. Seeing the worry on his face, I simply shook my head. It was all lies. They didn't explain anything. My grandfather nodded deeply and gripped my hand tightly. Then, lowering his voice but putting tremendous weight into every single word, he revealed a shocking truth. Listen carefully, Nicole, and stay calm. 3 years ago, when you entered college, your mother, your late father, and I discussed this together and set up a trust fund for you. The amount was $420,000. $420,000? The number felt so unreal that my mind went completely blank. My grandfather continued, that money was meant for your tuition and living expenses. Your mother is the trustee, but you are the beneficiary. According to the contract, $100,000 was to be distributed to your account every year. $100,000 a year is several times more than my annual income. For 3 years, I had worked myself to the bone, sacrificing sleep, only to realize how insignificant that money had been in comparison. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and my body trembled with a violent anger rising from deep inside my gut. What had those 3 years of my life been? I've never received that money, not even once. And I barely squeezed out words. My grandfather's face twisted with fury. I know this isn't just a family issue. This is a serious crime. He immediately pulled out his smartphone. I'm calling my lawyer right now. Their lies and excuses end here. At his firm declaration, I nodded hard. This was where my counterattack began. The morning after Christmas, my grandfather, my lawyer, Mr. Smith, and I were at the bank. We were shown into a private meeting room and sat across from the branch manager. Mr. Smith laid out in legally impeccable terms my rights as the beneficiary of the trust and formally demanded disclosure of the transaction records. But the branch manager's response shattered our expectations. I fully understand your position. However, I deeply regret to say that the official trustee of this trust is your mother, Mrs. Thompson. Under the law, even you, Ms. Nicole, as the beneficiary, cannot be shown detailed transaction records without the trustee's consent. At those words, I sprang to my feet. What? It's my money. Why can't I see it? The manager shook his head apologetically. I'm afraid those are the rules. All we can confirm is that the trust exists and that, in accordance with the contract, funds have been transferred every year to the designated beneficiary account. It was an overwhelming wall. We could confirm that the money had moved, but we couldn't reach the core issue of who used it and how. For the moment, we had no choice but to leave the bank. That afternoon, Mr. Smith summoned my mother and sister to his law office. My grandfather and I were present as well. So when Mr. Smith confronted them with the facts confirmed at the bank, the existence of the trust and the annual transfer of $100,000, my sister immediately launched her counterattack as if she'd been waiting for this. See, I told you, the money is being properly managed. You're just still too young, so mom and I are protecting it for you. Even the bank acknowledged that. Convinced that the law was on their side, her attitude had grown far more arrogant than before. Beside her, my mother simply nodded. That's right. As I bit my lip in frustration, Mr. Smith spoke calmly. We can petition the court and force disclosure of the records. However, it will take some time. Time. In that window, my sister could destroy evidence. Protected by the wall of the law, she looked as though she were laughing at us. This wouldn't end here. If the law could move quickly, then I would. Deep inside, quietly and firmly, I began planning my next move. On the drive home, with my grandfather at the wheel, I suppressed my frustration and let my thoughts race. If the law wouldn't act immediately, I had to attack from a different angle. My sister Casey was smart, cunning even, but she had one fatal weakness: her vanity. Back at my apartment, I immediately opened my laptop and began thoroughly combing through her social media accounts. Trips across Europe, luxury restaurants, designer brands, hundreds of glamorous photos spanning 3 years. I zoomed in on each one, scrutinizing every detail, dates and tagged locations, friends appearing in the photos, and the exchanges in the comment sections. I searched for any crack, any inconsistency. Hours passed, my eyes blurring from fatigue. Then I finally found it: a photo from an Italy trip 6 months earlier. My sister was posing confidently on the balcony of a luxury hotel. The comments were filled with praise from friends. Gorgeous. I'm so jealous. Among them was one comment from an unfamiliar account. Casey, it was such a wonderful trip. Did everything work out with that private bank? A private bank? My chest tightened. If it were a normal bank transaction, no one would phrase it that way. I immediately looked into that account, and it belonged to one of my sister's friends, a woman who appeared to work at a Swiss financial institution. That was when I became certain. My sister had another flow of money, one completely unknown to me. I kept digging. The credit card companies my sister used, the luxury brand boutiques where she was a preferred client, the travel agencies she worked with. I had no legal authority, so of course I couldn't obtain any direct information, but that wasn't my goal. What I was looking for was her pattern of behavior. And then I found another crucial clue: a photo of an airline ticket my sister had posted on social media. She had proudly photographed a first class seat, but in one corner of the image was a small printed string of characters. It was a customer management code used by a specific travel agency. I jotted it down and quietly picked up my phone, and the person I called was Lauren, a college friend of mine who was interning at a travel agency. I had no intention of asking her to do anything illegal. I just needed a little help as a friend. Lauren, it's Nicole. Sorry to call out of the blue, but I wanted to ask you something. The pieces of my counterattack were slowly coming together. Nicole, long time no see. What's up? Lauren replied cheerfully on the other end. I briefly explained the situation and asked about the customer code used by the travel agency my sister relied on. Of course, I didn't ask for any direct customer information. If you happen to know which agency uses this kind of code, could you tell me? I'm just curious which company my sister is a VIP client of. Sensing the gravity of the situation, Lauren lowered her voice. Okay, I can answer in general terms. That code belongs to Global Travel Consulting. They also provide concierge services for the ultra wealthy. They're nothing like ordinary travel agencies. They only deal with very exclusive clients for the wealthy. Without my trust fund, there was no way my sister could afford services like that. Lauren added one more critical piece of information. That company is famous for its strict privacy protection, but there's one distinctive feature. They rank their clients based on asset levels, and for their top tier clients, they offer introductions to partner Swiss private banks. Swiss private banks. It was a perfect match for the phrase I'd seen in the social media comment. That phone call yielded far more than I'd expected. As soon as I hung up, I contacted my grandfather and our lawyer, Mr. Smith. After hearing my report, Mr. Smith responded with a voice filled with both surprise and admiration. Excellent work, Nicole. This is extremely valuable information. There's a high probability that after transferring money from the legitimate trust account into her own account, your sister moved the funds again, almost like money laundering, into overseas private banks. If we'd only been looking at domestic accounts, we never would have seen the full picture. His words strengthened my conviction. We need to make her let her guard down. If she believes we're still struggling with disclosure from domestic banks, she'll eventually slip up. Mr. Smith agreed with my proposal. Exactly. Then we'll deliberately proceed slowly with the court petition for disclosure. In the meantime, can you obtain decisive evidence? Yes, I answered firmly. Her greatest weakness is her vanity, her need to show off her success. That's where an opening will appear. I'm certain of it. The plan was set. On the surface, we would appear stuck in legal procedures. Behind the scenes, we would gather decisive proof that this was the beginning of a quiet war to reclaim my future. A few days after launching the plan, I deliberately visited my mother looking utterly exhausted. Mom, I'm so tired. Even Mr. Smith says there's nothing he can do against the bank's rules. We'd have to file a lawsuit, and that would take so much time and money. And I let out an exaggerated sigh and slumped my shoulders. Maybe Casey was right after all. She was managing the money for my sake, and I doubted her. I ended up tearing the family apart. At my performance, relief clearly washed over my mother's face. Nicole, I'm glad you understand now. Yes, Casey has always put you first. Yeah, that's why I want to apologize to her. I was thinking maybe we could have dinner somewhere tonight. That evening, my sister Casey showed up at the restaurant I'd chosen, brimming with confidence. The moment she saw me, she flashed a triumphant smile. So you finally come to your senses, Nicole? You realize now that resisting was pointless, right? Yes, I'm really sorry, Casey. I played the role of the completely surrendered younger sibling. When the wine we'd ordered arrived, I pressed on. But still, you really are amazing. I had no idea you've been so successful in business. That travel consulting company, the Swiss bank, it's all a completely different world from mine. I deliberately wove the key words I'd uncovered into the conversation. For a split second, her eyes widened in surprise, but she must have decided I was simply expressing innocent admiration, unaware of the truth. Her vanity quickly outweighed her caution. Oh my, you know quite a bit. Well, I suppose it's a world you'll never have anything to do with. She took a sip of wine and, as if she'd been waiting for this moment, began to boast. Swiss banks are on a completely different level when it comes to security. Client privacy is absolute. Unlike normal banks, they don't just leak information because someone is family. If you want to manage assets safely, that's the standard you need. I nodded along, all the while making sure under the table that the recording button on my smartphone was working perfectly. Yes, keep talking. Tell me more in your own words about that so called secure asset management. Forget whose assets they really are and say more. The trap was almost complete. The day after my dinner with my sister Casey, I returned to Mr. Smith's law office with my grandfather. Mr. Smith played the audio file I had recorded on his PC. When it finished, he nodded gravely. I see. This will be a powerful weapon. He turned the screen toward us. Listen carefully, Nicole. This recording serves as evidence of extremely bad faith conduct by the trustee and those connected to her, showing that they were operating overseas accounts without informing you, the beneficiary. Based on this, we can petition the court on the grounds of a strong suspicion of asset concealment and request an emergency asset freeze along with a compulsory disclosure order for all transaction records, including overseas accounts. My grandfather asked, so what does that mean exactly? What they fear most is having the entire flow of money exposed to daylight. Mr. Smith replied, we'll use this recording as our trump card and issue them a final ultimatum. Mr. Smith immediately called my sister's attorney. The voice of the opposing lawyer came through on speakerphone. Calm but utterly uncompromising, Mr. Smith laid out our demands. We are in possession of an audio recording that strongly suggests Casey Thompson has concealed trust assets. Within 48 hours, you are to disclose all account information and present a repayment plan. Failing that, we will proceed immediately with criminal charges. There's no room for negotiation. On the other end of the line, silence. After a long, heavy pause, the lawyer finally spoke as if squeezing the words out. Understood. I will inform my client and get back to you. As the 48-hour deadline loomed, a call came into Mr. Smith from my sister's attorney. What came through the speaker was a completely drained voice. My client wishes to speak directly. She will come to your office tomorrow morning at 10. It was a signal of surrender, but it wasn't over yet. The final confrontation awaited the following day. At the meeting arranged as their response to the ultimatum, my mother and sister appeared. My mother looked as if she had aged years overnight. My sister, her pride utterly shattered, looked hollow and lifeless. Their exhausted appearance was, in itself, a white flag. Mr. Smith spread a mountain of transaction statements out in front of them. There's no point denying it. All the records are here. At his words, my sister murmured weakly, I understand. At that point, Mr. Smith stepped back slightly and gave me a look. This was my time. I slowly stood up and faced them. Picking up one of the statements, I thrust it in front of my sister. This shopping trip in Paris, do you remember it? The day you bought this $5,000 bag, I couldn't afford my textbooks and lived on instant noodles for a week. I pointed to the next statement. This spa at a five-star hotel while you were popping champagne. I was working a late night restaurant shift with a high fever. Then another page. Oh, and look at this. Last winter, right when that record breaking cold wave hit, you were warming yourself at a luxury spa resort with your friends. I was shivering in my apartment, wearing my coat indoors, writing reports because the heater was broken. I couldn't afford the repair. Each quiet word I spoke carved deeper into their guilt. At last, my mother collapsed into tears. Nicole, I'm so sorry. My sister, her voice trembling, pleaded, but please forgive us. We're family, aren't we? The moment I heard that word, the last trace of compassion in my heart vanished completely. Their tears no longer reached me. They weren't tears of remorse, only self pity born for fear of losing everything. Family? Do you really think you have the right to use that word? I looked down at them coldly. Family doesn't steal someone's future. Your vanity consumed 3 years of my life, and mom, you just stood by and watched. That's why you're no longer my family, especially you, Casey. I paused, then delivered the final decisive blow. Mr. Smith ran the numbers. Because of your greed and mom's weakness, the total amount I lost comes to $308,421. That's the price you put on my future. Under the weight of that number, neither of them could lift their heads. I placed the settlement agreement Mr. Smith had prepared in front of them. So sign this, agree to repay every last cent. I picked up the pen and set it down on the table. This isn't a negotiation, it's an order. If you refuse to sign, Mr. Smith will take this evidence straight to the prosecutor right now. You can spend the rest of your lives as criminals, or you can lose everything and start over from zero. The choice is yours. The powerless version of me was gone. Standing there was simply one person, someone who had reclaimed her future with her own hands. 1 month after the settlement was reached, Mr. Smith contacted me to say that all procedures had been completed. My mother had been removed as trustee, and my grandfather was appointed in her place. And into my personal account was transferred everything, the portion recovered through the liquidation of my sister's assets, and the full amount of the trust fund that should have been mine from the beginning. Rows of numbers I had never seen before were printed in my bank book. I stared at them for a while, yet strangely, my heart was calm. The true sense of liberation came that night. First, I went to the restaurant where I had worked late into the night. When I told the manager today will be my last day, he looked surprised, then patted me on the back. I see. You're going to focus on your studies. Good luck. Next, I visited the university library where I had spent so many afternoons. In the usual quiet hall, I handed my resignation to my supervisor. I'm sorry for the sudden notice, it's for personal reasons. Perhaps sensing the situation, she accepted it without asking a single question. Finally, I went to the cafe where every morning had begun with the scent of espresso. After closing time, I returned my key to the owner. Thank you for the past 3 years. He smiled and said, I'll miss your latte art. I visited 3 workplaces and said 3 goodbyes. It felt like a ritual, cutting one by one the chains that had bound me for 3 long years. When everything was done, I walked alone back to my apartment. I no longer needed to set alarms for my work shift. I no longer had to squeeze time out of exhaustion just to nap. Looking up, I saw the full moon quietly gazing down at me. Overwhelming freedom, and a calm yet powerful feeling, one I had never known before, rose from deep within me. I didn't cry. I simply took a deep breath, and it felt as though 3 years of fatigue quietly melted away. And then my life changed completely. The relentless schedule that chased deadlines vanished, and gentle time I could use by my own will, returned to me. It was time to reclaim my humanity. Freed from financial anxiety, studying to become a nurse was no longer a burden. It became a pure joy. My academic performance improved dramatically, and at last I began walking straight down the path toward my dream. One weekend, I visited my grandfather. As the new trustee, he carefully and clearly explained how my assets were being properly managed. Then he said this to me, Nicole, money is a tool meant to enrich your life. Never let it control your life. The previous trustees forgot that. His words sank deep into my heart. Since that day, my mother and sister have completely disappeared from my life. But one thing is certain, those 3 years of hardship were never meaningless. They were a long run up, one that allowed me to truly stand on my own and reclaim my life. As my new life quietly began, a different kind of bill was being delivered to my mother and sister. Recently, Mr. Smith, acting as the legal representative of the trust now managed by my grandfather, sent a final report on the repayment status. What was written there was the inevitable outcome of their own greed. My sister Casey lost everything, the luxury apartment, the car, the brand name goods that once fed her vanity. She now lives in a cheap apartment in the suburbs, working the very waitress job she once looked down on, living only to repay her enormous debt. Her friends vanished, her social media fell silent. I also heard that my mother lost her home and now lives alone, spending her days confronting the weight of her own sins. I quietly closed the report and looked up at the blue sky outside the window. There was no longer anger, hatred, or even pity for them in my heart. I simply accepted the facts. Their story, painted over with greed and lies, was over. Meanwhile, my story was finally beginning in the truest sense. With the strength I gained from 3 years of hardship, the strength to rely on no one and to believe in my own worth. The road toward my dream of becoming a nurse now stretches endlessly before me.